I quietly changed the locks on the $10 million mansion, the very house I funded only to be kicked out by my own son on housewarming day. When he and his wife returned, I stood behind the glass door holding the deed and said, "This is no longer your home. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong." Subscribe now to catch the next shocking and emotional episodes we bring to life. Under the weight of the rain, Evelyn Parker stood motionless at the edge of the stone pathway, the soaked hem of her pale gray coat clinging to her ankles. Her fingers curled stiffly around the handle of a worn leather suitcase, trembled not from the cold, but from something deeper, an ache that settled in her bones, older than grief, sharper than betrayal. Before her loomed the Parker estate, now renovated into a sleek, modern manor. Glass walls reflected jagged flashes of lightning, and warm light from the tall foyer windows cast an inviting glow. But Evelyn saw none of it as sanctuary. The rain blurred the outlines, but not enough to erase what this house had become, what he had made it. Lucas's house, not hers, not anymore. She blinked against the rain, her lashes heavy with water and disbelief, as thunder cracked above like the final punctuation to a sentence she'd tried her whole life not to write. She was 72 years old, and standing in a storm locked out of the home her husband had built with his own hands, the place where she had raised a boy into a man who now wouldn't even come to the door. The wind howled past the marble columns as her thoughts pulled her backward years, decades back, to the final evening she spent with Charles. It was spring when he died. Soft winds blooming irises' birdsong, but nothing about that day felt alive. Evelyn had sat by his bedside, fingers entwined with his, as the machines beeped their measured farewells. Charles had looked at her with those tired, knowing eyes and smiled a smile that was equal parts apology and goodbye. "You'll keep the house, won't you?" he asked in a whisper that barely moved his lips. "No matter what." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Of course. It's yours, Evelyn. Always was. Don't let him convince you otherwise." Charles murmured, his hand squeezing hers with the last ounces of strength he had left. "Lucas, he's a good boy, but he's hungry, too hungry." She wanted to protest. Lucas wasn't like that. Yes, he was ambitious. Yes, he had sharp edges, but he was her son, their son. But now, in the silence that followed that stormy lightning flash, Evelyn knew Charles had seen something she hadn't. The first year after Charles's death had been a blur. Funeral arrangements, estate management, adjusting to the suffocating quiet of the house. Evelyn filled her days with organizing, purging old belongings, and gardening alone. The house had echoed in ways it never had before. Lucas came more often during those months, always with Natalie on his arm, and a fresh wave of cologne that didn't belong in this old house. He made her coffee, kissed her cheek, and told her how proud he was of all she had handled. "You shouldn't be alone out here, Mom," he'd say. "This house is too big for you. It deserves to be alive again." Alive again. Those were the words that started it. He told her he wanted to convert the place into something beautiful. A modern estate, updated from the creaky charm of its colonial bones, but still full of family. A home for all of us together. You, me, Natalie, the kids will have. 3 generations under one roof, like you always said you wanted. The dream, her dream, alive again. For the first time in a year, Evelyn had allowed herself to picture it. Lucas, as a father, pushing a stroller through the garden Charles had cultivated. Natalie in the kitchen, Evelyn once filled with laughter and cinnamon. Family dinners, Christmas by the old fireplace. A future where she wasn't alone. So she said yes. She packed the antique china in layers of newspaper and labeled each box with delicate handwriting. She donated clothes, sorted linens, and closed Charles's study for the last time. Each drawer was emptied with reverence, every photo frame wiped with her sleeve, and a breathless prayer. She never stopped calling it home, even as she prepared to hand over the keys. Then came the meeting with the notary. Lucas insisted on formalizing everything. "You'll still be part of the household, Mom," he said, brushing aside her hesitations. This is just to make things smoother for renovations. No legal transfer, just usage rights. Trust me." And she did. She wore her blue skirt and pearls to the appointment, sitting between Lucas and Natalie at the mahogany table, documents spread like maps of an unfamiliar territory. The notary droned through the explanation, his voice distant and dry. Lucas kept nodding, prompting, smiling. He placed a reassuring hand over hers as she hovered her pen above the signature line. "I promise," he whispered so gently. "You'll have the master suite upstairs. It'll be the best room in the house. You deserve that." Evelyn blinked back tears. She remembered when he was 9 years old and had made her a Mother's Day card from scraps of construction paper and a glue stick. She remembered the crooked hearts he drew, the way he hugged her so tightly it made her knees buckle. She signed. The ink felt heavier than it should have. The pen trembled slightly in her grip, but Lucas just gave her that familiar grin, the one that always melted her worries, the one that made her believe even now. By the end of the week, she had officially vacated the property to a small rented cottage on the edge of town while construction began. Lucas was quick to gut the house, stripping the original windows, sanding down the floors, and painting over the wallpaper Charles had hand-selected in their youth. The house was changing fast. She'd visit occasionally at first, bringing homemade banana bread, trying to make conversation with the construction workers. Lucas was always in meetings. Natalie rarely made eye contact. Still, Evelyn remained hopeful. She picked out tiles for the kitchen backsplash. She suggested light fixtures. She even bought hand towels for what would become her bathroom upstairs. But as the months passed, those small decisions were politely dismissed or flat-out ignored. "We've decided to go in a different direction. Modern finishes are more resale-friendly, Mom. Just in case." Just in case. Her heart stung at that phrase. Still, she swallowed the bitterness. Lucas was doing this for all of them, she reminded herself. It wasn't about wallpaper or tiles. It was about togetherness, family. 6 months later, Lucas called her back to the house. Renovations were done enough, he said. He told her to pack light just for now and not to worry. "We'll make you comfortable." And so she did. She stood that day at the doorstep, suitcases in hand, the front garden unrecognizable. The stone fountain Charles installed was gone, replaced with a shallow, glassy pool. The porch railing had been swapped for steel and glass. The cherry tree she used to string lights on each Christmas had been chopped down. She rang the doorbell once, then again. Nobody answered. She waited. Finally, a light flicked on upstairs. A figure moved through the glass Lucas, shirtless, holding a tumbler. He looked at her through the pane for a long moment before turning away. The door never opened. Now in the present, Evelyn was still standing there, the rain soaking into her coat, her suitcase pooling water beneath her feet. The doormat read "Welcome" in stylized cursive, but it might as well have said "Go away." She exhaled sharply and turned from the door. Her heart thundered in her chest. Somewhere inside, behind the marble floors and recessed lighting, was the boy she raised. But the man that lived there now, he didn't see her. Or maybe he did, and that was the cruelest part. As she walked back to the gate, the storm roared around her, the wind battering her back like a reminder that this was no longer her world, not this house, not this son, not this life. And yet something inside her refused to crumple. Not yet, not now, not ever. Under the muted gray sky of early autumn, Evelyn Parker stepped out of the cab and stood before the newly renovated Parker residence, a towering modern structure that bore little resemblance to the home she had once known. The old whitewashed brick had been replaced with sleek charcoal siding, the porch enclosed in smoked glass, and even the oak tree Charles had planted on their 10th anniversary had vanished, leaving behind a sterile stone pathway that shimmered from a recent rain. Her suitcase wheels clicked against the stone as she approached the door. She adjusted the scarf around her neck, smoothing the flyaway strands of silver hair that curled at her temples. The house was impressive, yes, bigger, shinier, and colder, a perfect mirror of the world her son now inhabited. The front door opened before she could raise her hand to knock. "Mom," Natalie said flatly, one manicured hand still on the door handle, her eyes scanning Evelyn from head to toe, like she was inspecting an outdated appliance. "You're early." "I caught the express bus," Evelyn said, smiling gently, ignoring the tightness in Natalie's voice. It was a quiet ride. Natalie stepped aside, letting her in. "Well, Lucas isn't home yet. He's on a call with the Singapore office." "Of course." Evelyn rolled her suitcase in slowly, trying not to let the unfamiliarity of the space make her shrink. It wasn't just that the house looked different, it felt different. Hollow. The foyer had been stripped of its warmth. Gone were the heirloom rugs, the grandfather clock Charles had repaired by hand, the creaky floorboards that once told you who was coming down the hallway. In their place, high-polished tiles, recessed lighting, and cold air that didn't smell of bread or flowers or anything at all. "Let me show you to your room," Natalie said, her voice clipped as she turned on her heel. Evelyn followed. The bedroom was spacious and pristine, with tall windows, a low bed, and minimalist decor. Too perfect. Like a hotel room that hadn't yet been lived in. "This will be your space," Natalie said. "Try not to clutter it too much. We're still staging parts of the house for future development photography." Evelyn blinked. "Staging? I thought the house was for living." Natalie forced a smile, her teeth tight. "It is, but Lucas has some ideas." "Of course he did." Evelyn smoothed her skirt and placed her suitcase beside the bed. "You'll find everything you need in here. There's a small closet private bath, and we'll bring in a dresser next week." "No rush," Evelyn replied gently. "I travel light." Natalie had already turned toward the door. "Dinner's at 6. Lucas prefers an early schedule. Hope you're still good with gluten. We don't do multiple menu options here." The door closed with a quiet click behind her. Evelyn stood there alone, absorbing the silence. The room may have been beautiful, but it was colder than the cab ride in, and she was already being treated like an unwelcome guest in a house she had once built with love. That night at dinner, Evelyn sat at the long glass table with a linen napkin folded carefully on her lap. Lucas had arrived just minutes before, still thumbing emails on his phone. Natalie placed a roasted chicken in the center like a prop in a showroom. "Smells wonderful," Evelyn offered, attempting to bridge the silence. Lucas didn't look up. "It's catered." Natalie poured wine without asking. "We don't really cook much these days, not with our schedule." "Oh," Evelyn said softly, folding her hands together. "Well, I still enjoy cooking. Maybe I can help sometime." Silence. Then Natalie gave a brief, humorless laugh. "Sure, just don't burn the place down." Lucas chuckled, eyes still on his screen. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn tried to adapt, to smile, to fit herself quietly into the life they had constructed. She folded linens when no one asked. She baked cookies and left them in the kitchen, though they went untouched. She offered to water the indoor plants, organize the pantry, even polish the wood floors in the hallway. No one stopped her. No one said thank you either. And then came the conversation. It was a Sunday afternoon. Evelyn was seated in the upstairs library reading a book she'd brought from her cottage. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows made her feel just for a moment at home, until Natalie appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Mom," she said with that tone again, the one Evelyn had learned to dread. "I was just finishing this chapter." Evelyn smiled. Natalie didn't smile back. "Lucas and I talked. We think it might be better for everyone if you moved downstairs, to the guest suite." Evelyn looked up slowly, closing her book. "Downstairs. It's quieter, more private. And honestly, the upper floor is a bit cramped with your things here." Evelyn searched her face. "But I've only unpacked 2 suitcases." Natalie's eyes remained hard. "We just think it's best for the dynamic." Evelyn didn't ask what dynamic she meant. She nodded, stood, and carried her book back to the room she'd tried to call her own. That evening, Lucas didn't even mention it. He asked about the news, poured himself a glass of scotch, and talked about an investor dinner. Evelyn sat in silence, already feeling the weight of the basement pressing on her before she even took a step down. The guest suite was not a suite. It was a finished basement, yes, but barely. One small window near the ceiling let in the dullest sliver of light. The bed was stiff, the air damp. The pipes groaned at night like old ghosts. Still, Evelyn made it home. She stacked her books, folded her sweaters neatly, and placed a small photo of Charles on the nightstand. He smiled at her, frozen in time, as if to say, "You still have yourself." The next weeks unfolded like pages from a book she hadn't chosen. Natalie left Evelyn a list of tasks each morning. "Just to help out," she said breezily. But the notes were never kind. Clean the stove, dust the shelves, organize the laundry, make lunch. Lucas barely spoke unless Evelyn initiated, and even then his answers were short-rushed, often distracted. At first she tried to eat meals with them, but more often than not they claimed meetings, brunches, events. She ate alone in the basement, listening to footsteps and laughter above her. The silence, once a soft friend, began to scrape. One afternoon, Evelyn came upstairs to the kitchen to make herself tea. Natalie entered, talking on the phone with someone named Courtney. She's sweet, but you know how it is. Once they're past a certain age, they start to blend in with the furniture. Evelyn froze mid-stir, her teaspoon clinking against the ceramic. Natalie looked at her briefly, without pause in her voice, and turned away. The words echoed louder than any scream. Days turned to weeks, and the tasks grew. Soon Evelyn wasn't just helping. She was cooking dinner, cleaning bathrooms, ironing Natalie's silk blouses. One morning she found herself on her knees, scrubbing scuff marks from the hallway floor, while Natalie walked past in heels and didn't glance down. The cruelty wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It lived in dismissive glances, in unspoken rules, in the way Evelyn's presence was tolerated but never welcomed. She was a guest, a relic, a placeholder, someone they didn't want to look at, because she reminded them of a past they thought they had upgraded out of. And yet Evelyn kept smiling, kept folding laundry, kept waiting for Lucas to see. He never did. And when she overheard Natalie refer to her in passing to a friend on speakerphone as our live-in antique, Evelyn didn't even flinch. She simply returned to the basement that night, closed the door behind her, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long, long time. Her hands rested on her lap, her breath shallow, and her eyes, for the first time in a very long time, completely dry. Not from peace, but from a storm she had started to feel rising in her chest, not of rage, of clarity. Under the dim hum of the basement lamp, Evelyn folded the last dish towel and set it gently on the shelf. The silence wrapped around her like a weighted blanket, familiar now, but still suffocating. Upstairs, muffled laughter echoed faintly. The walls were thick, but not enough to mask joy that didn't include her. She paused, listened. Natalie's voice, bright, high-pitched, effortlessly social, floated above her like perfume she hadn't worn in years. "They're having guests," Evelyn whispered to herself, trying to sound neutral. She checked the clock. Nearly 6:30. No one had said a word to her. No mention of dinner, of visitors, of whether she was welcome to join. But this was her home too, wasn't it? At least, that's what she kept trying to believe. She smoothed her blouse, brushed a stray hair from her cheek, and climbed the stairs, each step feeling like trespass. The main floor buzzed with the energy of company music playing softly, the scent of expensive wine, low voices wrapped in easy charm. Evelyn stopped at the edge of the hallway and watched Natalie glide through the room in a silk emerald dress, her laughter echoing effortlessly as she passed a charcuterie board to a sleek woman in heels. Lucas was near the window, swirling a drink, laughing along with another man in a tight sports blazer. "Mom," Natalie called out suddenly, loud enough to silence the chatter. All eyes turned to her. Evelyn froze. "You're still up?" Natalie smiled, teeth bared. Evelyn stepped in cautiously, her voice soft. "I heard guests and thought I could help, maybe freshen the drinks or—" "Oh, no," Natalie interrupted, waving a hand dismissively, as though fanning away smoke. "We've got it under control. You should rest. You've had such a busy week with the housework." A ripple of laughter passed through the group. Evelyn blinked. Natalie turned to the others. "This woman irons better than my housekeeper ever did, and she doesn't charge." The room erupted in laughter, now sharp, amused, effortless, the kind that cuts before it lands. Evelyn's cheeks flushed. She smiled stiffly, but her hands clenched slightly by her sides. She looked at Lucas, standing just feet away. Her eyes searched his face silently, begging for reprieve. But Lucas only glanced at his drink, sipped, said nothing, did nothing. Evelyn swallowed. Well, I'll just get some tea. Great idea, Natalie chirped. Maybe make a full pot. Our guests love a little vintage charm. Another ripple of giggles. Evelyn turned and walked away, each footstep echoing like thunder in her ears. She moved through the kitchen in silence, her breath shallow, her heart stumbling over itself. Her hands shook as she poured the water, the kettle clattering louder than it should have. She didn't cry. Not yet. Later that night, when the house had gone still and laughter gave way to silence, Evelyn sat on the narrow twin bed in the basement wrapped in an old cardigan. The scent of the upstairs still lingered on her skin, perfume wine discomfort. Her palms still carried the tension of the evening. She opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside, an old unused notebook lay buried beneath hand towels and a pair of reading glasses. It had been a gift from Charles decades ago. The leather had faded to a soft brown. The edges were worn curled like pages longing to be touched. Evelyn pulled it out. She opened to the first page, untouched, yellowed slightly with time. At the top, in careful cursive, she wrote, October 11th, 9:52 p.m. Tonight I became invisible. She stared at the sentence for a long time. Her pen hovered beneath it. They laughed. Natalie mocked me. Lucas said nothing. It was like I wasn't there. Or worse, like I was something to be managed. It hurt, more than I want to admit, more than I can say out loud. But on this page I'll say it. She paused. Charles, I wish you could see what's become of our son. I wish you could hold my hand right now and tell me I'm not crazy, that I'm not imagining this distance, this cruelty. I'm trying to believe there's still some part of the boy we raised left inside him. She closed the notebook gently and held it to her chest. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. Over the next days, she began writing every night, quietly, meticulously, each entry a bleeding of truth onto paper. Not the polite versions, the real ones. 10:13. Natalie left me a note to clean the grout in the upstairs shower. It was written in lipstick on a napkin. I cleaned it. But I didn't erase the lipstick. I left it there like a scar. 10:14. Lucas walked past me in the kitchen today. I said good morning. He didn't answer. Just checked his watch and left. It was 9:02 a.m. I stood there for 10 minutes afterward, holding a mug I never filled. Each word gave her back an inch of space, a sliver of breath. She wrote about the morning she woke up cold because someone turned down the thermostat. About the dinner she was told she might as well eat in the basement, fewer crumbs upstairs. About how the house now smelled like lemon bleach and plastic air freshener instead of cinnamon and lavender. But more than anything, she wrote about the silences, the spaces between sentences, the ways Lucas avoided eye contact, the way Natalie always found new ways to remind her she didn't belong, and how Evelyn Parker, who once sang in the kitchen, who once loved fiercely and fully, was fading, but not disappearing. One evening, after another long day of washing floors and folding napkins, Evelyn wrote something new. Thinking 20. I keep thinking of the day I first held Lucas, the way his tiny fingers wrapped around my pinky, his breath soft against my skin. I keep asking myself, how did we get here? When did he stop looking at me like I was his safe place? And when did I stop asking for more? I think I've become a mirror they keep in the basement, not broken but inconvenient. She paused, staring at the ink. Then carefully, deliberately, she wrote, This is the last time I will let someone laugh at me and walk away untouched. She underlined it twice. The next morning, Evelyn opened the window of the basement just enough to let in a sliver of morning sun. She closed her eyes and breathed it in. She wasn't ready yet, but she was beginning. Each entry in her journal was a breadcrumb out of the darkness, each sentence a reclamation of voice. She would keep smiling, keep cooking, keep folding and dusting and offering her hand. But now every time they looked past her, Evelyn looked inward, and she saw a woman not fading but sharpening, a woman who had spent her whole life giving, now starting to remember what it meant to take back. The rain tapped against the narrow basement window like fingers drumming insistently, each drop echoing in the stillness of Evelyn's cramped room. It had been raining for hours, heavy, unrelenting, casting the entire house into a restless gloom. Upstairs the lights had dimmed. Lucas and Natalie were either asleep or gone for the evening. Either way, the house had gone quiet. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, the soft creak of the mattress beneath her, the only sound she could claim as her own. In her lap, a folded dish towel sat half-ironed, half a chore done like her life. She glanced at the closet near the utility corner of the basement. A disorganized stack of boxes leaned against one another in a precarious tower, many labeled with faint Sharpie ink from years ago XMAS Dad's book's old decor. She hadn't opened most of them. She hadn't wanted to. But tonight something in her shifted. Maybe it was the sound of the storm, or the ache in her hands, or the feeling she couldn't name that had been rising in her chest for weeks. Something between grief and fury. She stood up slowly and crossed the room. The boxes smelled like time dust and cardboard memories gone stale. She lifted one marked Charles' office and peeled back the flaps. Inside, a few old ledgers, a cracked leather belt, and a stack of yellowing stationery. At the very bottom, crumpled in a corner, was a pillow. Blue cotton. Familiar. Her breath caught. She reached in, hands trembling slightly, and pulled it out. It was his. She knew it instantly. The faint scent of cedar and aftershave still clung to the fabric buried beneath years of neglect. Her fingers traced the seams almost unconsciously, like she was touching a memory. The pillow felt heavier than it should have, firmer. She squeezed it. Something inside shifted. Evelyn turned it over and felt along the edge until her fingers caught a tiny slit in the lining, something Charles would have sewn with meticulous care. She reached inside. Metal met her touch. A key, old, cold, and unmistakably deliberate. Its teeth were wide and slightly dulled. She stared at it in the dim basement light, thunder rolling faintly overhead. Charles's key. A moment passed suspended in air, and then she knew. She held the pillow to her chest and looked toward the narrow stairwell that led upstairs, her heart beating faster than it had in months. She didn't bother changing her slippers. She didn't grab an umbrella. She moved quietly like a whisper up the stairs and through the hallway. The door to Charles's old office was now used as a storage room. Lucas had kept it locked most of the time, claiming the old wiring needed fixing. But Evelyn had watched enough. She had counted the patterns. Tonight the room was unoccupied. The handle creaked slightly as she turned it slow and steady and entered the room that smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. The walls were bare. The desk was gone. But on the far wall, still untouched, was the old bookshelf with the false backing. She stepped to it, moved aside the spine-labeled State Taxes 1991, and found the indentation just as she remembered. With a shaking hand, Evelyn slipped the key into the small circular lock embedded in the wall. For a moment the metal resisted. Then with a soft click it turned. Behind the thin plaster cover was the safe, and inside that papers, stacks of them, neatly bound, yellow edges curled but otherwise untouched. Her knees threatened to give, but she stayed standing. She pulled the documents out one by one and laid them on the nearby storage cabinet, careful not to let them bend. Deed of property, asset allocation, ownership clause, trust transfer upon death. Her eyes scanned the lines, the bolded type, the names printed clearly. Then she saw it page after page, underlined in Charles's signature style. Sole ownership, Evelyn Parker. Not Lucas. Not shared. Not inherited. Evelyn. Only Evelyn. Her breath hitched. She gripped the countertop, blinking rapidly as the room tilted slightly beneath her. All this time, the renovations, the signatures, the promises Lucas made, the assumptions he built into every word, all of it predicated on a lie. Because legally this house was never his. Charles had seen further than she had. He had known his son's hunger, his ambition. He had known that Evelyn's kindness, her blind faith, might someday need a wall to lean on. And he had built it here with legal clauses and unspoken love buried behind a false wall and an old pillow. A sob escaped her lips, half laugh, half cry. She clamped a hand over her mouth, afraid of being heard. But there was no movement in the house, no one coming to check. She was alone, alone with the truth. Evelyn gathered the documents and slipped them into a canvas tote resting in the corner. She closed the safe, locked it again, replaced the book on the shelf, and gently shut the office door behind her. Back in the basement, she placed the tote beneath her bed and sat down slowly. She didn't cry, not this time. She stared at the wall in front of her, at the water stain shaped like a withered leaf. Her heart beat like war drums in her chest. She had power, and no one knew, not yet. The rain had stopped, but Evelyn hadn't noticed. She sat alone in the dark, back pressed against the cold cinder-block wall of the basement. Her hands clenched tightly around the manila folder now thick with the weight of truth. Her knuckles were white. The thin, sharp edges of the legal papers had already carved faint red lines into her palms, but she didn't let go. Her breath came in shallow bursts, not from fear, but from the fire she hadn't felt in years. It burned low and slow, like embers catching after a long winter. Her pulse pounded in her ears, not because she was afraid of what she had found, but because part of her had always known it was there waiting. The safe. The key. Charles's foresight. She felt it now, his voice in the back of her mind, his steady hand beneath her own. Don't let him convince you otherwise. That had been his warning. She hadn't understood it then. She did now. Evelyn closed her eyes and pressed the folder to her chest. She could hear footsteps above the thud of Lucas's hurried stride crossing the hallway, Natalie's heels tapping like drumbeats of dismissal. Their voices were muffled, but the tone hadn't changed in weeks. Short, cold, calculated. They had written her off. They thought she was buried in this house, tucked away like an old quilt that only comes out when company needs impressing. But now she knew the truth. This house, these walls, this land, it all belonged to her. Not Lucas, not Natalie, her. And for the first time in months, she wasn't just Evelyn Parker, mother, widow, housemaid. She was the owner, but she wouldn't confront them, not yet. Not in the heat of emotion, not with red eyes and shaking hands. That was what they expected. That was what they had trained her into: meekness, silence, gratitude for crumbs. No, she would move like still water, quiet, patient. She'd strike when it mattered most. The next morning, Evelyn woke before the sun. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't feel tired. Something in her had hardened overnight. Her movements were deliberate now, brushing her hair, tucking the folder into her bag, slipping on her coat. She knew exactly who she needed. Harold Bloom, Charles's attorney for over 2 decades. A man with a slow voice, sharp memory, and the kind of integrity that couldn't be bought by people like Lucas. Harold had been at their wedding, had once helped them write up their first will. He was old now, semi-retired, but Evelyn remembered every detail of his cluttered downtown office. The old map of the state framed above his desk, the leather chair that wheezed when you sat in it. She took the early city bus, sitting quietly near the back, her bag clutched in her lap, as if someone might snatch it. The morning light crept in through the smudged windows, illuminating her face. Her features were calm, but her eyes were steel. Harold answered his office door himself. He hadn't changed much. Still tall, though thinner now, his gray hair combed back neatly. Suspenders. The same smell of pipe tobacco clung faintly to his clothes, though Evelyn was sure he hadn't smoked in years. He looked surprised, then warmly concerned. "Evelyn," he asked. "Well, I'll be damned. You look just like your mother used to in her stubborn days." Evelyn smiled tightly. "I think I've earned that resemblance." He gestured her in without hesitation. The office was as she remembered, papers stacked in organized chaos, books lining every wall, and a teapot steaming on a warmer behind his desk. They didn't waste time with small talk. Evelyn set the folder on his desk and opened it with quiet ceremony. She didn't say a word as she pulled out each document and laid it before him, one, then another, then the next. Harold adjusted his glasses and leaned in. He read in silence, page after page, occasionally nodding, sometimes pausing to reread a section. His expression remained neutral, but she could see something shift behind his eyes, a recognition, then a quiet fury. When he finally looked up, his voice was lower, sharper. "Where did you get these?" "In the safe," Evelyn said, "behind the false shelf in Charles's office. I found the key last night." Harold nodded slowly, tapping a finger against the deed. "He never told me where he hid the originals. Just said he'd made sure you were protected in case." He trailed off, then looked back at her. "Well, he wasn't lying." Evelyn exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So it's true?" she asked. "This house, the property, it's mine." Harold sat back, steepling his fingers. "Not only is it yours, Evelyn, It was never legally transferred to anyone else. From what I see here, Charles placed it in a living trust with sole ownership to you. Lucas was never granted executor rights, no co-ownership, no power of attorney. But the renovation contract, the papers I signed, were likely cosmetic or limited use agreements. Harold interrupted, his tone turning grave. Unless you signed over a deed, and I mean an actual notarized deed, nothing changes your standing. Evelyn's chest tightened. I signed something. A usage agreement, Lucas called it, for renovations. Harold's eyes sharpened. Do you have a copy? No. He nodded, then stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. I do. She blinked. You do? Charles sent it to me before he passed. Told me to keep a file on Lucas just in case. He flipped open a folder, pulled out several sheets, and handed them to her. It's exactly what he said it was. A usage agreement. Nothing more. Gives Lucas permission to manage the property during renovations. No authority to transfer, sell, lease, or remortgage. Evelyn took the papers, her hands trembling now, but not with fear, with clarity. Harold leaned forward. He's got nothing. Legally, morally, financially, he's built all of this on sand. She blinked at him, stunned by the finality in his voice. What do I do? She whispered. Harold's eyes didn't waver. That depends. You want to take it back today? We file a property assertion claim and injunction against further alterations. The court will recognize your deed. Lucas won't be able to lift a hammer without your signature. Evelyn sat still, so still. She thought of the laughter. Natalie's voice calling her a housekeeper, the dismissive glances, the basement, her birthday forgotten, the look on Lucas's face every time she asked for a moment of his time. She thought of Charles, his warning, his love, his foresight. Then she looked Harold in the eye. Not yet, she said. Harold raised an eyebrow. You want to wait? Yes, she said firmly. I want them to think I'm still in the basement. I want them to laugh, to feel safe. And then when they least expect it, I want to take back what's mine. Harold smiled, slow and impressed. There's the woman I remember. Evelyn smiled back, but her eyes were sharp. Tell me what I need to prepare. And Harold did. For the next hour, they laid out a plan. Harold would begin gathering property assessments, filing a soft lien on the title to prevent hasty refinancing. He'd reach out to the notary who handled the renovation forms and secure statements of limitation. Everything would be done quietly, methodically, with legal precision. And when the moment came, Evelyn would strike, not with anger but with law, not with raised voices but with papers. Irrefutable, final. By the time she left Harold's office, the clouds had parted. The sun hit her face as she stepped back onto the city street, her coat whipping in the breeze. In her hand, the folder no longer felt like weight. It felt like armor. As she boarded the bus home, Evelyn didn't sit in the back this time. She chose the front. She stared out the window the entire ride, watching the city pass, feeling the pulse of something deep and unshakable. Justice, not revenge. Ownership, not permission. And somewhere beneath it all, the echo of Charles's voice, proud and quiet. You've always had the strength. You just needed the key. Gomku. The basement was quiet that night, quiet in a way that felt different, not suffocating, not heavy, but sharpened, purposeful. Evelyn sat by the window, the dim glow of a single desk lamp casting her silhouette against the wall. On the bed beside her was a yellow legal pad, pages filled with notes, names, and instructions written in her precise, looping cursive. Each word was a gear in a machine she was quietly building, one that would soon roar to life. The manila folder from Harold Bloom sat open on her desk. Beside it, a second file, thinner but growing, contained photocopies, affidavits, a preliminary lien document, and a checklist Harold had titled Assertive Recovery Protocol. His handwriting was scratchy but determined. Evelyn had followed it line by line. First, ensure legal standing, done. Second, secure the property. That part had taken some maneuvering. She couldn't just call any locksmith. Lucas had a Rolodex full of contractors who answered only to him. But Evelyn had spent years navigating systems built to exclude her. It didn't take much for her to find a quiet, cash-friendly locksmith willing to come late in the evening and work without asking questions. She found him through the bulletin board at St. Luke's, a church she'd visited years ago during one of Charles's benefit events. No digital receipts, she'd said over the phone. No fuss, just steel and silence. The man didn't flinch. She arranged the meeting for a Friday evening, the day Natalie always scheduled her spa treatments, and Lucas had his standing dinner with a tech investor friend. She'd memorized their calendar. She'd bided her time. The locksmith would be there at 9:15 p.m. It was now Tuesday. 3 more days. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, not as dread, but as pressure, a coiled spring waiting to release. The waiting didn't bother her. Evelyn had mastered patience. What she hadn't expected was the clarity it brought. She thought of the basement window, the chill of the stone under her feet. She thought of the laughter upstairs that never included her, but most of all she thought of the others, the women she'd seen at the bus station, the man in the park with mismatched shoes and a lost expression, the ones like her tucked away, ignored, forgotten. She hadn't been ready to see them before. She hadn't wanted to. But now she saw them everywhere, and she wanted more than just retribution. She wanted purpose. The idea had come while she was folding napkins. Natalie had left a scrawled note asking for the formal set to be ready for brunch with her Pilates group. Evelyn stood at the sink, folding linen into tight, crisp triangles, her fingers moving on muscle memory. That's when she remembered the flyer faded and curling in her old recipe box. The Silver Light Project, a community initiative that helped displaced and abandoned elderly individuals find temporary shelter, emotional support, and dignity. Evelyn had donated to it once after Charles's passing. She'd written a $50 check and tucked it into a Christmas card. She retrieved the flyer that night, unfolded it gently, and dialed the number at the bottom. A woman answered. Her voice was warm but weary. "This is Marianne." Evelyn cleared her throat. "I think I might have a home to offer you, a permanent one." There was a pause. "Ma'am," Marianne said slowly, "can I ask who you are?" "No one important," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling but firm. "Not yet, but give me until Saturday." Wednesday was logistics day. Evelyn spent hours on the back patio under the guise of pruning the winter plants, while she called Harold with updates from a burner phone she'd purchased with cash. She asked him to begin drafting a notice of intent to assert possession. She told him to prepare the press version just in case. "Are you sure you want the media involved?" Harold asked. "No," Evelyn said, "but I want to have it ready, just in case they try to make noise." "You're thinking ahead." "I've had time," she said simply. That night she updated her journal, her entries shorter now, but charged. February 14th, 10:44 p.m. They don't know I've stopped being quiet. They don't know the ground beneath them is cracking. I won't scream, I'll act, and they won't see it coming. Thursday she met with Marianne in person. They sat at a quiet cafe just past the river neutral ground. Marianne had kind eyes, short silver hair, and a clipboard that never left her hands. She listened to Evelyn's story without interrupting once. When Evelyn finished, Marianne exhaled slowly. "How many rooms?" she asked. 5 upstairs, 4 in the new wing," Evelyn answered. 3 baths, a sunroom. "You're offering the whole house." "I'm offering what's mine." Marianne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know how many people are on our wait list?" "Evelyn, do you know how many sleep in their cars on sidewalks? Grandmothers, veterans, people like you." "Exactly like me," Evelyn said. "That's the point." By Friday morning, everything was in motion. Harold had filed the lien quietly but officially. The locksmith had confirmed his arrival. The press packet was ready, tucked in a sealed envelope marked only if needed. Marianne had already begun screening potential residents. Now it was time to wait. That evening, Evelyn moved through the house like a shadow. Lucas was gone. He'd left without a word, like always. Natalie hadn't spoken since breakfast. She floated through the house in her robe glass of Sauvignon Blanc in hand, muttering to herself about a delayed delivery of orchids. No one noticed Evelyn. Not when she folded the laundry. Not when she walked past the security panel to disable the silent alarm using the code Lucas had carelessly left scribbled in a drawer. Not when she walked through the old study one last time to press her fingers against the grain of Charles's old desk, whispering, "It's almost time, love. I'm..." At 8:45 p.m. she returned to the basement and changed into a charcoal sweater, black slacks, flat shoes. Nothing fancy, just functional. She tied her hair back, checked her pocket for the house title, the notarized paperwork, and her phone. Then she turned off the lights and climbed the back stairs. At 9:00 p.m. she stepped outside onto the back porch. The wind was still, but the trees swayed as if they knew something was about to change. The sky was moonless stars hidden behind gauze clouds. She stood in the dark, her hands in her pockets, and looked up at the house. Her house. She studied its angles, the way the windows glowed faintly, unaware of their reckoning. She thought of every birthday forgotten, every meal eaten alone, every night spent beneath their laughter. Then she smiled, not with bitterness, but with clarity. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. And when the locksmith's van pulled quietly into the alley, headlights off, Evelyn was already unlocking the gate to let him in. Her hands were steady, her eyes bright. The hour had come. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sound Evelyn would remember for the rest of her life. Not loud, not theatrical, just a precise little snap, mechanical, final, absolute. It was 9:42 p.m. The locksmith, a silent man in his early 40s with a salt-streaked beard, stood back and inspected his work. "You're good now," he said quietly, handing her the new set of keys. "No one's getting in without these." Evelyn took them, her fingers closing around the cool brass. "Thank you." He nodded, then paused. "You sure about this?" Evelyn looked past him to the tall, gleaming silhouette of the house, her house bathed in soft, golden light from the porch sconces. She could still see the faint reflection of herself in the glass door. Hair pulled back, shoulders squared, eyes calm and sharp. "I've never been more sure of anything." He gave a short nod and disappeared into the night. Inside the house was silent, still. She moved through the rooms methodically, not hurried but deliberate, checking each door, each window. She had already removed Lucas's security access that morning, resetting the app passwords, disabling his code from the central panel. It had taken less than 30 minutes. For all his pride in owning the smart home experience, Lucas had no idea how dumbly he'd left himself exposed. The kitchen gleamed under the overhead lights. She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, quiet ceremony. She didn't tremble, she didn't rush, she simply waited. And then at 10:03 p.m. it began. The front gate rattled, voices loud, angry, startled. She heard Natalie's heels first clacking up the stone walkway, then the shrill pitch of her disbelief cutting through the air like broken glass. "What the hell, Lucas?" "The key's not working." Evelyn stayed where she was in the center of the living room, her back straight, her tea untouched. Lucas's voice followed, tighter, edged with irritation. "Let me try mine." Silence, then a loud clang. The handle jerked. The lock didn't budge. Lucas banged on the door. "Mom." Another bang. Mom opened the door. Evelyn walked slowly toward the glass-paneled foyer. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She drew the curtains back with a single smooth motion, and there they were. Natalie stood with arms crossed, phone in hand. Lucas loomed beside her, jaw clenched, eyes wild. They both froze when they saw her standing on the other side of the glass, calm, still framed like a portrait beneath the chandelier light. Evelyn didn't open the door. Instead, she raised her hand slowly and tapped the envelope against the glass, thick official bearing her name in bold print. Title deed. Property trust. Charles's signature. Lucas's inheritance, nothing. Natalie's mouth dropped open. "What is this, Evelyn? What the hell are you doing?" Evelyn opened the door just a few inches, her voice steady and low. "I'm taking back what's mine." Lucas stepped forward. "You've lost your mind. You can't just... This is my house." Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. She held the deed higher, tilting it toward the porch light. "It was never yours. This house was placed in a living trust by your father. Ownership transferred to me 10 days before he died. Every inch of it, every tile you ripped out, every floorboard you walked across." Lucas blinked, then barked a laugh. "I don't care what you think you found, this won't hold up. You signed it over. You signed the renovation paperwork." "I signed a usage agreement," she cut in. "No transfer of title, no change in ownership. You were a guest, Lucas, a contractor with access, nothing more." Natalie stepped forward now, voice shrill. "You can't do this. Where do you expect us to go?" Evelyn looked at her, really looked at her. The way Natalie's mascara clung beneath her eyes, the way her knuckles whitened around the iPhone she held like a weapon. "You made it very clear," Evelyn said coldly, "that I was never welcome in this house. I'm simply returning the favor." Lucas slammed a hand against the doorframe. "You don't want to do this." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Why? Because you'll sue me." "Go ahead. I'd love to hear you explain to a judge how you tried to illegally claim property that was never yours. You'll regret this. No, she said, you will. She held up one final sheet of paper, Harold's notarized filing of the lien. Lucas's face paled as he recognized the notary stamp. This was filed 4 hours ago, Evelyn said calmly. Which means even if you had owned the house, which you don't, you couldn't refinance it. You couldn't lease it. You couldn't sell it. The bank is frozen. And the utilities. They're already in my name. Lucas opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. Natalie looked at him, then back at Evelyn, eyes wide now. You're serious? As a ledger, Evelyn replied. The silence that followed was different than the kind they had given her all those months. This was silence born of realization, of loss. The look in Lucas's eyes was no longer anger. It was panic. Natalie turned to him. Lucas, say something. He took a breath. Then another. This isn't over, he said, pointing a shaking finger at his mother. Evelyn smiled small and cold. It is. She stepped back and shut the door with a soft click. Then she turned the lock once, twice, and drew the curtain across the glass again. Outside, the porch remained lit for several more minutes, but inside Evelyn stood in the quiet, the heartbeat of the house settling around her like the last note of a long-forgotten melody. She had done it. No screaming, no revenge, just precision, just truth. She picked up her tea, still warm, and took a sip. It tasted exactly like freedom. Gomku. By dawn, the house had changed. The light pouring through its windows no longer illuminated cold silence. It spilled over hand-labeled boxes filled with folded blankets, stacks of board games, a crock-pot bubbling with lentil soup in the kitchen, and a group of volunteers unloading donated furniture from a van parked in the driveway. Evelyn stood barefoot in the sunroom, watching through the glass as a woman in a purple windbreaker carefully planted geraniums beside the old walkway. Another elderly man with an oxygen tank arranged folding chairs in a semicircle on the back lawn. Marianne, clipboard in hand, moved between them with quiet efficiency. The Silver Light Project had arrived, and for the first time in months, Evelyn didn't feel like a guest in her own home. She felt like a steward, a guardian of something real. It had only taken 24 hours for the news to catch fire. It started with a photo. One of the younger volunteers had taken a picture, Evelyn standing behind the glass door, holding the property deed with both hands, a quiet storm of dignity in her expression. The caption read, "She took back her house. Now she's giving it to people who need it more than her own son ever did." The image spread. Within a day, the post had over 100,000 shares. By day, 2 local news outlets were running the story with headlines like, "Mother betrayed by son turns mansion into sanctuary for the abandoned." Reporters showed up at the gate, microphones in hand. Evelyn didn't speak to most of them. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol or a celebrity. She didn't need the world's sympathy. But when Marianne asked if she would sit for one interview to raise awareness for the Silver Light Project, she agreed. The camera crew set up in the garden. Evelyn wore her navy blue cardigan and the brooch Charles had given her for their 40th anniversary. The interviewer, a kind-faced woman named Denise, sat across from her, careful not to press too hard. "I think people want to know," she began gently, "why you didn't just sell the house, why you're doing this." Evelyn looked out toward the group gathered on the patio, 2 women playing cards. A man reading the newspaper out loud to a woman who couldn't see well anymore. Then she looked back at Denise. "Because healing should live somewhere," she said. "And this house was built on love. I'm just restoring it to what it was meant to be." The interview aired that evening. By morning, the donations began pouring in. Checks, food, books, medical supplies. A local chef offered to cater weekly meals. A team of retired teachers volunteered to host enrichment sessions, knitting, writing, watercolor, poetry circles. A dentist offered free dental care for all residents. The house had become something more than reclaimed property. It was sanctuary. Lucas saw the headline while standing in line at a bank. His 5th attempt in 2 weeks to secure emergency funding for a failing startup that had bled money for months. The article included a photo of Evelyn standing on the porch, smiling faintly as a woman in a wheelchair rolled past her. There was another image, a group shot with Evelyn seated at the center, surrounded by seniors laughing, lifting mugs of cocoa wrapped in crocheted blankets. Lucas's face turned a pale shade of fury. Natalie texted him a screenshot an hour later. "We're a meme now. Congratulations." By the end of the month, their accounts were frozen. The renovation loans Lucas had taken in anticipation of flipping the house defaulted. The high-risk crypto investments Natalie had bragged about at dinner parties evaporated. Lucas tried to bluff his way into a real estate deal with a Miami partner, only to find out that his credit rating had tanked since the lien. He called 3 friends to stay with. None returned his messages. He asked Natalie if she could move back in with her sister. "She blocked me 2 years ago," Natalie replied dryly. "Remember the Vegas incident?" He didn't, because it had never mattered to him, not until now. When they arrived at Evelyn's gate 2 weeks after being publicly disgraced, financially drained and socially exiled, they didn't ring the bell right away. Lucas stood in the driveway staring at the flower beds. They were blooming again. Natalie wore oversized sunglasses and a scarf, though there were no paparazzi in sight. Evelyn came to the door before they knocked. She had been expecting them. Lucas took a step forward, clearing his throat. "Mom," he said, things have been bad." Evelyn said nothing. "We need somewhere to stay." "Just for a while," he added quickly. "We'll stay out of the way, just until we get back on our feet." Natalie was already fishing in her bag, pulling out a paper Starbucks cup like a peace offering. "We brought scones." Evelyn looked at the cup, then at them. She stepped out onto the porch. "You want to stay here?" Lucas nodded. "Just for a few weeks, maybe a month." "I see," Evelyn said, folding her arms. Silence stretched between them. Then Evelyn pointed toward the side gate. "There's a volunteer orientation at 4:30, she said. "You'll be helping serve dinner, clean up, and assist with laundry. If you're staying, you'll work." Lucas blinked. "You want me to volunteer? I want you to earn the roof you sleep under." Natalie gave a bitter laugh. "You're joking." Evelyn didn't flinch. "This house is a place of service now, not indulgence. If you want warmth, you bring warmth. If you want shelter, you offer it to others first." Lucas looked away. He thought of the nights Evelyn spent in the basement, the dinners he never invited her to, the way he'd laughed when Natalie called her a ghost. He swallowed hard. "I'll do it," he said. Natalie stared at him. "Are you serious?" He turned to her. "I don't have a choice." "You do," Evelyn said. "You always did. You just didn't like where it led." She turned and walked back inside. Lucas followed, and behind him Natalie lingered, caught between pride and panic, before finally stepping through the gate as well. Inside, the hallway smelled of lemon and fresh bread. The laughter of strangers filled the space he once thought he owned. Now he would serve them, and Evelyn. She didn't need to look back to know the shift had happened. This was no longer their house. It never had been. It was hers, and she was giving it on her terms to the people who needed it most. The first morning Lucas reported for volunteer duty at the Silver Light Center, he wore a designer hoodie and a scowl. He stood by the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching 2 elderly women play cards, while a third hummed and stirred oatmeal at the stove. The scene felt absurd to him, soft, slow, and too quiet. He didn't belong here. He wasn't built for this. "Here," Marianne said, handing him a towel and pointing to a sink full of breakfast dishes. "They're picky about water spots. No shortcuts." Lucas took the towel without a word and turned toward the sink. His shoulders slumped as he began scrubbing plates that weren't his for people he didn't know, in a house that no longer welcomed his name on the mailbox. Natalie had refused to participate. She'd packed 2 bags and left the day before, texting Lucas from the train. "I didn't marry into this to become a janitor for the elderly. Good luck with your penance." He hadn't responded. He didn't tell her that some part of him, some hidden, uneasy shard of self, wasn't entirely sorry. That afternoon, he helped carry folding chairs to the backyard for a poetry reading. Then he refilled pitchers of lemonade. Then he cleaned a bathroom, not the guest one, but the one in the west wing with the broken tile and the cracked grout. Evelyn hadn't spoken to him beyond what was necessary. She called him Lucas, not son. Her eyes didn't hold anger, just distance, and something heavier. He deserved worse. By day 3, the novelty had worn off. His back ached, his shoes were scuffed, his ego had peeled away like dead skin. He thought about leaving, but something kept him rooted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the way the house no longer mirrored him, it mirrored her. His mother, her order, her warmth, her quiet authority. He found himself watching her from doorways the way she moved through the halls with presence again. Not a ghost anymore, a lighthouse. That evening he was assigned to help a new resident unpack. Room 7, second floor. A frail woman with a voice like broken glass and a sharp tongue. Her name was Mrs. Bet Langer. She had been a high school English teacher for 42 years. Her hands shook as she handed him a photo frame. Top drawer, next to the socks. Lucas nodded gently, placing the frame beside a lavender-scented sachet. It showed her in a classroom surrounded by students, chalk dust on her hands. He smiled. "You look like you ran the place." "I did," she said flatly. He chuckled. "What brought you here?" She paused, eyes fixed on the wall behind him. "My son. He locked me in a bathroom for 3 days." Lucas froze. "What?" He said it was for my safety, that I was getting confused. But he didn't call anyone, didn't get help, just slid crackers under the door and turned the TV up. Lucas felt his stomach churn. When the neighbor heard me yelling and called the police, he told them I was hallucinating. Mrs. Langer turned her eyes to him fierce despite the fog behind them. "Know what hurts more than betrayal, boy, dismissal, like you were never anyone worth listening to." Lucas didn't know what to say, so he finished unpacking the drawer and quietly left the room. That night he sat on the edge of his cot, in the converted storage room Evelyn had allowed him to use. He stared at the ceiling and tried to sleep, but the silence didn't cradle him, it crushed him. For the first time in a long time he didn't dream of success or condos or IPOs. He dreamt of the basement, of his mother alone in the dark. The next morning he didn't wait to be called. He showed up at 700 a.m., helping to prep breakfast. No hoodie, just an old flannel shirt he found in a donation bin. He was quiet but efficient. He wiped down tables, brewed tea, helped a man with Parkinson's button his cardigan. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it wasn't about himself. 3 days later, a new arrival came in. The man was lean, sallow, with shoulders that sagged as if he carried decades of disappointment. His name was Arthur Collins, 81 years old, former carpenter. His daughter had signed his bank account over to herself, then disappeared. "She said it was for efficiency," Arthur muttered. "She said I'd thank her." Lucas listened in silence. "She sold my tools, gave away my dog, said I was a liability." Arthur blinked fast, then slower. Lucas sat beside him on the bench in the garden. "No one should be treated like that," he said. Arthur looked at him. "You speak from experience." Lucas stared at the petals of a nearby rose blushing red against the morning dew. "Yeah," he whispered, "but from the other side." Arthur nodded. "Then fix it. Start here." It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was something. Each day Lucas worked without being asked. He painted the fence, replaced a broken step, cleaned windows until they gleamed, and he listened to stories of abandonment, of wills rewritten in secret, of children who visited only when an inheritance was on the line. He saw himself in everyone, and it sickened him. One night he passed the kitchen and saw Evelyn standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. She was humming. Her back was straight, her movements graceful. For a moment he remembered her hands cradling his fevered head as a boy, her voice reading stories at bedtime, the way she'd wait up on the couch every night he came home late. He stepped inside. "Do you need help?" he asked. She looked at him. A pause, then a nod. "Stir this, slowly." He took the wooden spoon. Their hands brushed. No words passed, but something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But air. And for Lucas that was more grace than he deserved. For Evelyn, it was the beginning of a reckoning he'd have to walk through, one meal, one mop, one story at a time. The morning light filtered softly through the east-facing windows of the common room, warming the oak floors beneath Evelyn's quiet footsteps. The house was already stirring, clinking teacups murmured good mornings, the rustle of crossword pages. Another day had begun at the Silver Light Center, but something was different in the air. Lucas stood near the fireplace, his face pale but resolute, a folded piece of paper clenched in his hand. He had been pacing the hallway for the past half hour, stopping and starting, stepping toward the common room only to retreat, breath caught in his throat. But now something inside had settled. The running had ended. Evelyn noticed him from the dining room threshold. She didn't say a word. She watched. He cleared his throat, glanced around the room, and waited until the voices faded. He began the word cracking against his teeth. He closed his eyes for half a second, then started again. I have something to say. To everyone here, but mostly to her. Every eye in the room turned toward Evelyn. She didn't move. Lucas continued, his voice low but unwavering. When I came back to this house, I was desperate. But not in the way you think. I wasn't just broke, I was empty. A few of the residents shifted in their seats, watching carefully. I used to think I was successful, that I was sharp, a builder. But the only thing I ever built was distance between me and the people who mattered. His voice wavered now, but he pushed forward. My mother gave me everything, her time, her love, her home. And I repaid her with silence, with pride, with cruelty. He looked straight at Evelyn now. Mom, I forgot who you were. Or maybe I didn't forget. Maybe I just chose not to see you because it was easier that way. Because I didn't want to be reminded of where I came from, of who taught me what love was supposed to look like. The room was still. I understand now, he said, what I did, how deep the cut went, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to earn the right to be here, not as a guest, not as a son, but as a servant, a volunteer, a human being who's finally ready to learn what you've always known. A single tear slipped down his cheek. He let it fall. If there's space for me here, I'd like to stay. Not because I deserve it, but because I need to. His words ended like a held breath released. No one clapped. No one spoke. Evelyn stood still, her face unreadable. She turned slowly and walked away. Lucas's chest caved in slightly, his fingers tightening around the paper in his hand. He had poured everything he had left into that moment, and she had met it with silence. But she didn't owe him more than that. He went back to his room without a word. No one stopped him. He lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, hands limp at his sides. The sun outside shifted. Afternoon melted into evening. He didn't eat dinner. He didn't come out. It wasn't until just past midnight that he heard it, a soft knock. Not loud, not urgent, just a single polite tap. Lucas sat up, blinking in the dark. At his door was a small plate. And on that plate, covered gently in plastic wrap, sat a round golden cake, slightly lopsided, browned at the edges, a dusting of powdered sugar on top. Lemon poppy seed, his favorite, from childhood. He reached down, his hand trembling, and picked it up as though it might disappear if he blinked. There was no note, no message, just the memory and the sugar. Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, unwrapped the cake with careful fingers, and took a bite. It was warm, faintly citrus. And it tasted like every afternoon he'd come home from school with scraped knees and find her waiting in the kitchen apron dusted with flowers, smile soft and sure. He chewed slowly, then the second bite, then the third, and by the time the last bite melted on his tongue, the tears had come. Not dramatic, not heaving sobs, just a slow, unstoppable stream. He cried for the boy he used to be. He cried for the woman who had never stopped loving him even after he stopped deserving it. He cried because sometimes grace doesn't arrive in grand speeches or sudden catharsis. It arrives quietly on a chipped porcelain plate dusted with sugar and memory. Lucas pressed the back of his hand to his eyes and let it happen. Outside the door, Evelyn stood barefoot in the hallway, listening not for gratitude, but for grief. It was the only language worth hearing now. She didn't go in. She didn't need to. The gesture had spoken enough. I see you. You're not past saving, but you have to save yourself. And in that moment, Lucas understood. He was beginning again. One tear, one cake crumb, one honest apology at a time. 1 year later, the house on the hill looked nothing like the battleground it had once been. The garden out front bloomed with wildflowers that bent gently toward the morning sun. The gate, once a symbol of exclusion, now swung open every day from sunrise to sunset, welcoming visitors, volunteers, and residents with the soft creak of old hinges and the warm aroma of bread baking in the kitchen. What had once been a silent monument to pride and ambition had become something far more sacred, a sanctuary. The Silver Light Center thrived. Community members from neighboring towns donated clothes, books, music, their time. A grant from a local foundation had funded the addition of a greenhouse and meditation space. High schoolers came on Saturdays to read aloud to those with fading vision. A retired hairstylist offered free trims and curls on Fridays in what used to be Natalie's walk-in closet. And in the back of the house where Charles's study had once sat cloaked in shadow music, now spilled from the windows like birdsong, Evelyn sat at the upright piano, her fingers lightly tracing the keys, guiding 5 pairs of older hands across ivory and black. Her students, Eloise, Bernard, May, Ruth, and Thomas, all over 70, laughed as they stumbled through a ragged rendition of Let It Be. Again, Evelyn said, gently smiling. Bernard groaned, "You're a gentle dictator." "And you're off-key," she replied, poking his shoulder. They laughed. When the lesson ended, the group filed out for tea and ginger biscuits, leaving Evelyn alone in the quiet room. She rested her hands on her lap and closed her eyes for a moment. The sunlight danced across the hardwood floor in flickering patterns, just like it had the day Charles first brought the piano home. "You said it had gathered dust," she murmured to the empty room. "You were wrong, love. It sings every day." Down the hall, Lucas's voice echoed in the foyer as he greeted a delivery team with new blankets for incoming residents. "Put those in the West Wing, please. Room 10 has a draft. Let's make sure they're warm tonight." He wore a navy sweater with a stitched silver light emblem on the chest, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked different now, not just older but softened, humbled, grounded. He spent most of his days coordinating logistics, meeting with donors, sitting through board meetings. But he never forgot to walk the halls each night before bed, checking that every door was closed gently, that every blanket was tucked in just right. He was no longer running a house. He was caring for a home. When asked in interviews what had changed him, he always answered the same way: "My mother didn't raise me for profit. She raised me for love. I just forgot. I'm trying to remember better now." Natalie had been gone for 10 months. No forwarding address, no return visits. Lucas didn't talk about her, and Evelyn never asked. The house kept moving forward. That afternoon, Evelyn sat at the small writing desk in her bedroom. Her own room, now not a basement or borrowed corner, but a sun-filled space lined with books, fresh flowers, and a single framed photograph of Charles in his favorite fedora. She opened her leather-bound journal, thicker now than ever, and turned to the final page. The paper was warm under her fingers, soft from age, familiar as breath. She picked up her pen and began to write. March 22nd. A year ago today I stood at the window and locked a door behind me for the first time, not in fear but in strength. I didn't know then what I would become, only that I could no longer be what they expected. I didn't know if I would ever forgive or be forgiven. I just knew I had to begin. This house is full again, not of furniture, not of wealth, but of voices, of memory, of purpose. Lucas walks these halls now with open hands. I don't call him son yet, not out loud. But sometimes when I hear him laugh with the residents, I remember the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder in church, and I wonder if maybe, just maybe, he's come back. She paused, fingers tight around the pen. Then she wrote the final line, slow and certain. The real key was never in the pillow. It was in the heart that refused to stay silent. She underlined it once, then set down the pen. Outside her window, the light had shifted again. Early evening, that golden hour that bathed everything in forgiveness. Evelyn stood and walked out into the hallway. She passed the piano room. Lucas was in there now, tuning it carefully, checking each note with the same reverence he once reserved for quarterly reports. He looked up and smiled. "Hey," he said, "you free at 7? We're showing It's a Wonderful Life in the lounge." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Again, they asked for it. She smiled. Of course they did. He shrugged sheepishly. They say it reminds them of what matters. She nodded, placing a hand gently on the doorframe. It does. And then she turned and walked down the corridor, the air behind her filled with the faint echo of a piano chord. The sun dipped low as she reached the garden where fresh lavender bloomed along the edge of the path. She sat on her favorite bench, the wood warm against her palms. A group of residents played cards at a table nearby, their laughter drifting lazily into the breeze. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of the years behind her, the darkness, the betrayal, the loneliness, the noise of pain, the silence that had nearly buried her. And then she opened her eyes. The sky was streaked with orange and gold. A breeze passed gently through the flowers. She breathed it in, not as a woman scorned, not as a mother abandoned, but as someone returned to herself, fully, finally. The final scene, the sun rising over the house. Light spills through every window. No more shadows, only warmth. And Evelyn backlit in the piano room laughing softly as she presses a single note. The music begins again. Fade to light, fade to stillness, fade to peace.